The holidays are over for now, at least. Interestingly enough, that's where we are in Scripture as well. And John, between Tabernacles and Hanukkah and the Feast of Dedication, which we'll get to later on today. But wanted to share with those who are not here in Palm Springs that we held a special Yizkor memorial service on Shmini Atzeret, which is the year, the Hebrew date of the anniversary, the Yortzeit of all those who were slaughtered on October 7th, in the beginning of this vast slaughter, vast, wide, and deep slaughter. And I'll be happy to share that service with folks. If you're interested, just shoot me an email and I'll send a copy to you. I incorporated some modern poetry, some poetry that had been written in the last year, especially, and had to rewrite one of the prayers that we often say in memory of just the Israeli soldiers. I rewrote it to widen it a bit. So I feel that our at least as a community, Or Midbar, we're doing what we should and keeping it in the front of our minds and the front of our souls as this second year of the war goes on, and unfortunately does not seem to be getting much better. In fact, maybe better in one place, worse than another. And in the chat box, there's other things that we're doing as Or Midbar. One is tomorrow night is our annual Pride Kabbalat Shabbat interfaith Kabbalat Shabbat. It's on your screen now. This is something we're very proud of. We've been doing it this will be the 9th time, I think. Yeah, the 9th time we're doing this. And you can see by the collection of logos at the bottom how many organizations are involved. The one organization that's not there in the logo is a Buddhist abbey, kind of not far from where we live, and one of the Buddhist priests comes and leads us in a meditation as well. But there's another synagogue, and probably most noteworthy here of the logos below is the Saint Teresa of Child Jesus Church, which is a Roman Catholic church, and Father John, the Roman Catholic priest, joins us every year as a contingency from his church as well. And as I often say, it feels like one of those things that can really only happen in Palm Springs or maybe San Francisco. But I'm quite proud of this, and believe it or not, we keep it in an hour, now maybe an hour and 5 minutes, with all those different clergy people speaking. And it's a Jewish service, a Kabbalat Shabbat service, but with readings and reflections by folks from all different flavors of denominations of Christianity. The other thing I want to bring everybody's attention to is something that we asked you to, if you can be part of, we asked you last year as well. That's Jews Do the Blues, and that'll be up on your screen. Both of these things are in the chat box, and if you're able to sponsor us this year, as some of you already have, we really, really appreciate it. This is what lets us keeps us going. By this time of year, we're already using what we raised at the end of the year, the last quarter of the year. That's what helps us get through, is what we raised in December. Okay, so that's about it, I think. Yeah. Text is in the chat box. We have to make up a little bit from last week's. I checked the last time. I checked the video and saw where the group got to. Right, it ended with Ajit making a comment about his bar mitzvah. I think that's what more or less was the blind man's bar mitzvah, that he's already been bar mitzvah, he's of age, he can be asked himself. So I think we're in chapter 9, verse 24, and we're still kind of, it said the Sabbath day in verse 14, but it's also I think it was a little unclear as to when the Feast of Tabernacles ended. Is it still the time of Tabernacles? Is it in between? But as Steve Kinney has told us a number of times, that the holidays are important here. The Jewish holidays are brought up, and as we go into next chapter, we'll see the next stop on the calendar. Yeah, did somebody want to continue with a comment or question about what was covered last week? last month, whatever it was. Yes, I'm assuming that people remember. I remember more than you do because I just watched the recording the other day. Okay. Okay. So Ajit, if you would, 24.
Okay. So for the second time, they called the man who had been blind, and they said to him, "Give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner." He answered, "I do not know whether he is a sinner. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see." They said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, I have told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?" Then they reviled him, saying, "You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know what we know that God has spoken to Moses, for as this man, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from." The man answered, "Here is an astonishing thing. You do not know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but he does listen to one who worships him and obeys his will. Never since the world has begun, it has heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." They answered him, "You were born entirely in sins, and are you trying to teach us?" And they drove him out.
Hey, reactions. Yes, Richard.
What does it mean you were for the Jewish leadership to say you were born entirely in sin? Isn't that like a Catholic type of theology?
I could imagine somebody saying to that, for instance, if he was an illegitimate child, for instance. I don't know. But I don't know in this context. I don't really know the answer to why what it means in context here, other than it's a way of dissing somebody. It's not just no. I think it's in every religion that has sin, which is probably most religions, if not all religions around the world, Richard. But it's not. I don't think it's the same born in sin, unless it's meant to be foreshadowing. I don't know, Steve Kinney. Is this foreshadowing of sorts?
Well, just the idea that he was born blind, maybe that's the
Oh,
equation.
right. And the punishment, we brought that up actually last meeting. This idea in rabbinic literature that I think I brought. Yeah, it's the last source. I don't know if we did it, but if something's wrong with, and I mentioned to you that there's a section of the Talmud that if you do this, if you do that during coitus or thinking of this, then the baby will be born this way. If you've sinned, the baby will. In other words, a blind child is thought to be a baby is thought to be the fruit of sinners. So I think that's what that means here, Richard. Yeah, of course.
Theologically, that doesn't make any sense, Rabbi. It basically says the sin belongs to the parents and the child is being punished.
Oi, my friend, have you never heard the words of Ezekiel, who says to the people who come to Babylonia and they say, it's not our fault the temple was destroyed. Avot achlu boser v'shinei banim tikena. Our parents, they ate sour grapes, but yet it's our teeth that are feeling set on edge. And Ezekiel says, tafsiku imashtiot. Enough with the nonsense. That's not the way it goes. Each person is judged according to their own. Yeah, that's Ezekiel. That's Jeremiah as well. But there's a strong tendency in Hebrew Bible biblical theology that children definitely suffer for their sins of their parents. Yeah.
Well, it also tells me where Amazing Grace came from, Steve Kinney. I was blind and now I see.
Well, there it is.
There it is.
But also love the prophetic, the continual throughout the Hebrew scriptures, the prophetic adjustments or corrections or efforts to reorient folks away from, a theology that doesn't really hold up to the nature of their understanding of God. So the prophets are always recalling them to to mercy, love, and caring for folks in need.
Yet those beliefs persisted.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like they do in Christian faith,
Yeah.
right? I mean, there's
And
just
also,
lots of
I'm not always sure it's a linear development. In other words, there's, there's parallel tracks going on. But yeah, according to the editor of if we could talk about an editor of the Hebrew Bible, or those that form the final canon anonymously, that could very well be their intention, is that the later words are, guys, let's get a hold of yourself. Anyway, so I think that kind of covers your question, Richard, I hope. I'm reminded here of conferences with name tags. So I would imagine many of us have been to those kind of conferences before, everybody in their own lane. And you'll notice how instead of people looking at your eyes, often are looking at your tag, and they're trying to figure out who you are. And I will be cynical and say very often, and what can you do for them? I was at a Society of Biblical Literature conference a few years ago. I remember sharing it with you folks, and I purposely went up to the younger speakers to congratulate them on their presentations, because nobody was going up to them, the ones who are unknown, especially. The one who are known, everybody stands in line to talk to. And especially the Israelis, who I could see were really struggling with their English, and I wanted to encourage them. And each time I came up, they would look first down to my badge. And I wanted to say to them, I'm nobody, I have no funding, I can't get you a job at any university. But this idea that we will treat you as your position holds. And what the Pharisees, I guess, those that are being spoken to here, it's like, who are you even to the whole Jesus thing? Who is he from Nazareth? It's this constantly, how can there possibly be any truth in this new message, this news, if we don't know who this person is? We don't know where it's coming from. There's no social standing. That's kind of what I'm reminded of here.
Yeah, I think that's what strikes me, that that human condition, of rivalry and status and caste, and all of that seems to be, the experts dissing the ignorant. But I also think this gives us a picture of the time in which this was compiled. In 90, the temple's destroyed, and the conflict between the uncircumcised and the circumcised is reaching a head, and it's gotten to the point where those who confess Jesus, those who are not circumcised but believe, but still, those who are circumcised but believe in Jesus, and those who are not circumcised are being prevented from fellowship in the synagogue. They're being thrown out. And so that's the for me, that's what the man born blind is. Finally, it's clear that he's being moved out, but he owns it. Whereas others are afraid to maybe make that open declaration. So I think in the Gospel of John, this is an instance of someone owning it, and regardless of those consequences.
Interesting.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Yeah. It seems to me that the blind man could have said to the Pharisees that were talking to him, you said the same thing of Moses at the time of Moses. Weren't the Israelites saying to Moses all along the 40-year trek, who are you to tell us, what to do? Who are you to set up the rules? Who set you up as the leader? So
It's cool that you bring that up, Richard, because I think in this is another Jewish aspect of the author or the editors of the Gospel according to John, in that this is a very Jewish story. It's a very, I'm using Jewish anachronistically here, but it's a very Israelite story. It's not just it was Moses, of course, but it was the prophets as well. Jeremiah was terribly hated, right, for his words. I don't think Ezekiel was terribly popular. There is this rejection of the leader. And I think that's probably intentional in the back of the mind. The
Well,
author,
rejected until he got some fame and status, until he got
But
a
even
position as a full professor. I mean, if
As a
he's only
full-
an associate professor, they're not going to listen to him.
right, and he has funding as well.
Yeah, and funding. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Something else.
No, I'll pass.
Okay. You sure, Ajit?
Well, I'm just really thinking, looking at it here and going on to the next paragraph where Jesus is calling himself Son of Man. And I'm really looking at this and saying, are the people arguing with Jesus about whether he is a prophet or something bigger than a prophet? Because it's a tradition that the people have rejected Elijah, they rejected Elisha, they rejected all the prophets that came. And so here, I have a sense that the way this is being proposed is that Jesus was just a Jewish prophet rather than something else, rather than someone who started a new faith or a new religion.
Well, until we continue in the story where it becomes something else,
Mhm.
quite especially the next chapter. So that's a great segue to the next chapter. Although we just have to finish this one. That's a great segue because of the motif of the next chapter. Yeah, that's actually good. I think that'll help us. But why don't we? Yes, Don.
When I read this, I don't think the man could have said any more clearly what happened, and yet he couldn't convince them. And I get the feeling like they didn't want to be convinced that he could have stood on his head and spoke, and they still wouldn't have believed him or understood. His question about whether they would like to become disciples, and that was the reason for constantly asking him to drill down into his experience, is interesting to me. He misread what they were saying too.
Mm. Okay, so John, would you read the next paragraph?
30, from 35.
Yes, please.
Jesus heard that they had driven him out, and when he found them, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered, and who is he, sir? Tell me, so that I may believe in him. Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he." He said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshiped him. Jesus said, "I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who do not see may become blind." Some of the Pharisees who were with him heard this and said to him, "Surely we are not blind, are we?" And Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would not have sin. But now that you say we see, your sin remains."
What do you say, Ajit?
This puts a very different spin to the earlier story, because here it seems to me blindness is spiritual rather than physical. So when you go back to the other story, I'm starting to wonder if that man was spiritually blind and accepted Jesus, therefore he was considered not being blind, or the whole story of blindness becomes for me based on this paragraph an issue of spiritual versus physical blindness.
Yeah, I think too that Jesus has a habit of talking on two different levels to people who want to hear him on one level. And it's almost like he's got his own special code of communication.
It would, Don, do you know that device that's used in some movies? I'm thinking of Woody Allen movies where the person on screen there's going on and then we'll turn to the audience and talk to the audience. Mel Brooks does that as well. It's a funny thing. Do you think that's kind of what's going on here? That there's the stories being told of Jesus about the narrative, and then it's from time to time Jesus kind of turns to us, the readers, or the readers saying, "But is that kind of what you mean?"
I think so. I think it's a lot of information for the reader at the present time, us in 2024, trying to glean something from the story. But it's a genius, I think, of the gospel itself. It does that a lot. What I mean by the genius, whoever wrote this or composed it in 90 AD or whenever it was written, almost had a foot in another time zone.
Mhm. Time machine. Okay.
Rabbi, what do you make of, he says, he's talking about the judgment that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind. But then he says, if you were blind, you would have no sin. Is that, it makes me think about, is ignorance bliss?
I think you're on the right track. There is, of course, a lot of discussions in Talmudic literature based on biblical precepts as to which sacrifices you bring when you sin. I mean, sin happens when you do something wrong, when you've strayed from the path, whatever that might be. And then is it intentional or unintentional? And so there's a lot of discussions around this time amongst the Pharisees as to what constitutes intentionality. And because it's not black or white, there's a spectrum and there's a gray area. And then there's, and I'm not sure when it begins, if it's already in this time or maybe the next century, there's conversations about things that you don't tell the people because if they'll still do it anyway. So it's better that they sin without knowing that it's a sin, right? If you know what would it be like? I mean, it doesn't groove with jive with how we think, how we speak, but yeah, it's like I'm sitting at a table at a restaurant or something where Sherman's local Jewish deli. People assume sometimes that it's even kosher, although with a Reuben sandwich, which I learned once I got here, has both meat and cheese in it. It's hard to understand how that would be kosher, but people will say, and then they'll order the latkes being potato pancakes. What could be more Jewish than latkes, right? Let's even make it a better scenario. It's during Hanukkah, right? And they're eating potato pancakes at a Jewish deli on Hanukkah. And am I going to be the one to tell them that I happen to know they fry their latkes in animal fat, which is not kosher fat? It's not a vegetable oil. Or should I just be quiet and just say, no, they should enjoy their latkes? Why should they feel bad about it? Especially since they've already had a few bites,
I agree.
I think I think that, but I think ignorance is bliss. Ignorance does, in other words, ignorance is, what is that expression? It is indeed, not knowing the law is, what's the expression? Richard, you already have, not knowing the law doesn't exempt you from the law. We see it in TV all the time. No, anybody?
Ignorance of the law is no excuse.
Yeah, so whatever, yeah, that idea. But here it is, yes, ignorance is an excuse of sorts. On the
That's
other
right.
hand, though, this is part of that long, evolving, stretched out sometimes painfully so, process in the gospel according to John of Jesus fully revealing himself as Messiah. Yeah. So it's a
My wife doesn't buy the idea of ignorance of the law for me either. So
yeah, I've been trying it for years. Really overweight? Do you think that, who said, I'm not sure that's unhealthy to be overweight.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
We've made
All
it
right.
this far.
Okay. Anything else before we go on?
No.
Okay, then. So Wayne, would you like, we're on the next page, the second page that went out this
Well,
week. Oh,
I
sorry.
would
go
like
ahead.
to just comment on what Steve just asked. And that is the certainty with which these leaders are casting him out. You know, they drove him out because he doesn't fit their theological framework or their corrupted power perspective, whatever you want to say. And so this idea of humility or you know, those who are certain are blind. Those who are open and don't have the final truth see, or at least have a chance to see with their heart.
Maybe take a simplistic view sometimes, but in my mind, it's just a bunch of old religious men who don't want their power challenged. And it's, to me, it's that simple. They just don't want somebody coming in and upsetting the apple cart. And they see Jesus as the person that will do that, take their power, take their wisdom, and they just don't. This new guy is pulling all their pillars down. So I guess I'm not as deep in some of this as you all, but I just think it's a bunch of men who don't want to give up.
So Wayne, you know me, you know I'm not terribly establishment, right? I've been anti-establishment for most of my career, maybe not as a teen. Yeah, I guess it's, yes. Basically, I've been anti-establishment and constantly questioning authority. So I would go with you on that, except for there's one caveat that I want to make, and that is from the historical context, not of 90 as much, but the historical context of those recalling the 70s, right? Or the 60s. The 60s are the first era, the first century of the Common Era. And that is this threat to their well-being by the Romans wanting to squash any kind of rebellion. And somebody coming and saying that I am the Messiah, I am the king, that could also be in their defense, although I agree basically with what you say, but in their defense, they could say, it's not just upsetting the apple cart, we're going to die because of this. The Romans are going to come down on us because this guy is claiming to be a king. And
Weren't they cuddling up to the, weren't they just getting in bed with the Romans? I mean, they whatever they did, you know, you look at the crucifixion or any other thing, and maybe I've seen too many movies from that time. However, they want to be in favor with the Romans in my mind, although they'd like to see them gone. So this new guy is just kind of upset everything.
yeah. Okay, it's a complicated situation. Steve, you want to give some more?
No, I think that's right. I do think that the Romans kind of gave the Jewish community or the Israelites some cushion. You know, they just had given up on getting them to, you know, be subservient or worship Caesar, right? So they just made an exception as long as, you know, the lid is on and that it doesn't upset the apple cart. But as soon as the early Jewish Christians start welcoming Gentiles into their group, then the more conservative Jewish Christians resisted that because they didn't want to be seen as the outsider who would then be forced to make tribute to Caesar. And so, yeah, I do think there's a political, there's an effort to protect their people against the upstarts who can be thrown in with the zealots or with the rebellion, which brings the Romans down harder. Yeah, so I agree with that. It's complicated.
Okay, remember, we're all about nuance. Okay, so Steve Byrne, you want to read from beginning of chapter 10? This is we're really in the same scene here. This is just because a new chapter doesn't mean it's a new thing. I know that's nothing new, but just to remind people.
Yeah, 10 seems to be kind of a transitional reflection on the tabernacles. It's still in that context, but it's shifting. And then we'll see when we get to the raising of Lazarus next time that we move into a whole different part of this structure in the gospel. But yeah, this is almost a denouement.
Okay, chapter 10. Very truly, I tell you, anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in by another way, is a thief and a bandit. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will not follow a stranger, but they will run from him because they do not know the voice of strangers. Jesus used this figure of speech with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. You want me to go on, or?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Why don't we go on and yes.
Okay. So again, Jesus said to them, very truly, I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and bandits, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved and will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly.
One more paragraph.
I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand, who is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and runs away. And the wolf snatches them and scatters them. The hired hand runs away because a hired hand does not care for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. And I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that do not belong to this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd. For this reason, the Father loves me, because I lay down my life in order to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it up again. I have received this command from my Father.
Okay. I hope everybody is as totally confused as I am.
Rabbi David, I think the symbolism of this section here is powerful and helps to understand the Christian theology of the Lamb of God and laying down one's life. That sheep gate is outside the temple. Jesus never entered the temple area any other way through the sheep gate, except on Palm Sunday when he was with the palms and what have you. That sheep area where there is a pool was used to clean the lambs for sacrifice. And there's a symbiotic connection between the sacrifice of Jesus and the sacrifice of the lambs in this story. And I just think the symbolism is extremely rich. But I don't know if that is Midrash, Christian Midrash, or whether it's symbolically accurate and true.
I think true would be the challenging word in your last sentence. You
Okay,
know, there's a lot of things that could be true at the same time. I'm thinking right now in reading this, when I said complicating, I'm thinking I grew up in a house, in my mother's house, I would show it to you if we were there right now. She has a old style crystal chandelier. And the piece de resistance is in the bottom one is a ball that has, I don't know how many sides to it, 24 sides to it, different kind. That's how I'm thinking of. It's almost like a Buddhist thing here, right? But I'm thinking of this gemstone that has so many sides to it, and each side is a little bit, each side is equally true. So that it starts with what you just said, Don, right? We're used to thinking of the Lamb of God. Well, but here Jesus is not the Lamb, Jesus is the shepherd.
yeah,
So
but he lays down his life. He becomes the lamb.
yeah, but that's confusing. If you're a teacher and you're trying to use a parable to teach a point, like really, is everybody going to follow you? But it's working on different planes.
Yeah.
And it's not the first time we've had something like this as well. So the mashal and the nimshal, the parable and the explanation of the parable are at different levels here. And so the basic complication is lamb versus shepherd. Then is what's the gate? Is Jesus the gate, or is Jesus the shepherd who's leading the flocks through the gate? Well, the answer is both, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I hear what you're saying. I hadn't heard what you said before, the business of the washing and the going through the gate for the sacrifices. I'm not sure that I see that here. So that's typical of midrash in any tradition, where you bring things from other places to help you understand this place. So I don't know who can anybody
I
make
do
sense?
like, I like Don's using midrash. Could this be a midrash on Ezekiel 34, where they, and then of course he's moving it into his own relationship with the Father and his own singular status. He begins to accent that in this text, but I do think the idea of a midrash on Ezekiel 34 is helpful.
All right, so Ezekiel 34 is the prophet calling out all these bad guy shepherds, the kings, the foreign kings, and who foreign kings, at least in biblical literature, not only the king of Israel, David, for instance, was a shepherd, and Moses was a shepherd, and Abraham, they're all shepherds, the leadership models, but also according to Ezekiel 34, these kings in the ancient Near East were also called shepherds. So that is one way of looking at that. That would be a wonderful thing to do, to really go detail by detail in 34 and see how that plays up.
Well, here is one text from 34 that I just opened
I
up.
was just gonna say, for those of us who aren't as erudite as the rest of you, I don't know what Ezekiel 34 is.
Let me read it, Wayne, just this paragraph. It says, "Thus says the Lord God, Ho, shepherds of Israel, who have been feeding yourselves, should not shepherds feed the sheep? The sick you have not healed, the strayed you have not brought back, the lost you have not sought. The sheep have been scattered, and they became food for the wild beasts. For thus says the Lord God, Behold, I myself will search for my sheep and will seek them out and will bring them into their own land. I myself will be their shepherd. I will seek the lost and bind up the crippled and strengthen the brokenhearted." Which to me reinforces the idea that the Jews are these bad shepherds that he is criticizing, the corrupt old men leaders, as you put it, Wayne. I mean, that's one aspect of it. But then, of course, also Jesus begins to identify himself as the shepherd, where in Ezekiel it's I myself, what did he say? I myself, God says. So,
Whatever we say about this, I like David's depiction of of the ball with many
Mm.
facets. It reminds me of the word diadem, or having each section of reflective light showing off a different color, and us reading this thing in that way, us reading this section in that way. I like the image of a diadem.
Yeah.
So let's
It
take
lets
that for,
us off the hook.
oh, go ahead, Ajit.
I think here also Jesus is identifying the shepherds that were not that great, not so good, and saying, I am the good shepherd. He's contrasting himself. The very first paragraph, first sentence of 11 says, I am the good shepherd. So I think he's contrasting himself against versus the shepherds that did not do what was just read from Ezekiel.
So I want to combine what Steve offered through Ezekiel and maybe a slightly different understanding, with the understanding there are multiple faceted truths involved. One of the aspects, no doubt, is Ezekiel 34, and this is wanting God is the true shepherd as opposed to those that are not. But in Ezekiel 34, it's talking about the foreign powers, and while the context that we have this here is really talking about the Pharisees or the Sadducees, those in the Jewish leadership, the Jewish, the normative Jewish political leadership of the time. I think it means both, because Jesus is going to go, in the next paragraph, is going to go extend this to non-Jew people in the world as well, like reminiscent of Acts, especially, reminiscent of Acts 20. And so I think it means, there's different aspects. It's not just Jesus as opposed to the Pharisees. It's Jesus as opposed to this, to this, to this, this. It's many, many different kinds of things. And then it's not just Jesus as the shepherd, but Jesus is actually the gate as well. And in other words, it's not, it means this, and not that. It means this and that and that and this and that and that. That's the challenging thing here, but perhaps that's also the brilliance of it.
I'd love to hear what Megan and Rita Claire think about it.
I just
Oh,
want
Megan?
to say, the last few sentences, it reminds me of the a twist on the Akedah, that he says, for this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life in order, he has to be killed in order to be resurrected. And he's willing to be sacrificed. He becomes a sacrificial lamb at the end. But I have the power to let down. So I have the power to
Well,
lift it up.
and Megan, that makes me think that this combines the suffering servant in Isaiah with, the model shepherd as Ezekiel laid it out. I don't know if that's what you were.
He says, because I
accenting.
laid down life in order to take it up again, sort of sounds like I give permission to be crucified as he was. So I have to do that in order to be resurrected again.
So it's
But it
foreshadowing.
reminds me, pardon me?
Foreshadowing.
Foreshadowing. And it also reminds me of a little twist on Abraham and Isaac, where he almost sacrificed him because God told him to, but he didn't. In here, the Father or God does sacrifice his son. It's always reminded me of that in sort of a way.
Yeah, I think intentionally so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don?
Yes, I just the idea of the shepherd and the gate. The biggest threat to a person's flock was either a wild animal or thieves. The shepherds, when their sheep was in the pen, laid in front of the gate at night to sleep so that they could be on guard and watch the flock and protect the flock against people who were going to steal them, and or wild animals that were roaming around. So I get that image when he, with this idea of the good shepherd lays his life down for his sheep. He becomes a protector of the sheep, whoever they may be.
You know, in the verse after, go ahead, Steve.
Rita Claire, were you raising your hand?
Yes, I did. I'm listening to all this and I'm just thinking, out of something that was supposed to be good for the people has not turned out to be as good as it should be. There are so many different ways of believing about Jesus, so many different ways. It seems to me, why did it open that door to have so much controversy, you know, about religion?
Yeah, well, absolutely. And I guess some folks like to take one facet and make that the answer over and against the other facets, if you will. Or idolatry always kicks in, no matter what religious tradition one is in, where we give absolute certainty to certain things over others, and then you're bad or you're evil or good based on where you stand or how that is calculated. But yeah, but I also like in this the intimacy of hearing the voice and my own hear me. So there's something also very personal and intimate that comes across.
Richard? Just unmute first.
You know, just adding on to what Rita said, which I really agree with her, that you know, metaphor and parables and stories are good for teaching. You know, they keep people's attention, and they're it's, you know, they're nice, fun to hear and listen to. But the downside of it is is when they get when they go astray or they get complex or they're subject to so many different interpretations.
Mhm.
And everybody has their own way of saying this is what it means, and that
Mhm.
leads to the result that it's one of the reasons why I dislike them so much, especially when it comes to, you know, religion and, you know, and serious things where it lets people just do whatever they want to do or interpret it however they want. So it's a problem. The metaphors and parables
Richard,
are
I
a
just got
problem.
back from Hawaii. I officiated a wedding, and the mother of the bride, who was raised Christian, Roman Catholic, she converted to Judaism for that very reason. She said, she said, my head's blown with all the
But
Christian
it's
stuff.
it's in Judaism too. I mean, it's
Well,
not.
I reckon that, and I said, so
Mhm.
why was that? And she said, because for me, it's the law. It's the way. It's the Torah. There's not as much speculating. I have a groundedness now that I
I
didn't
would
have
agree with her
before.
actually, but
Ajit, you got something?
Yeah,
something-
I'm just thinking that there are multiple interpretations, and the people who providing us these interpretations always insist that they are right, instead of saying,
Mhm.
hey, this is my opinion, I may be right or may be wrong. And that's not just in religion, that's in the politics of the country that we now, you know, everybody's right and the other guy is wrong. That's where we are. As far as the symbol of the shepherd, and someone said the shepherd, he also calls himself the lamb, the sacrificial lamb. I'm sitting here thinking, man, there are times when the shepherd gets killed too. So he's not necessary, you know, you're moving the shepherd to the lamb where, you know, I'm sure there are times when the wolf eats a shepherd too. So, you know, I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm confused is what I'm saying.
Well, it's a
So-
call for humility, right? It's a call to be blind and then we see.
But it's also a call to be accepting.
Yeah,
So
it is.
So Rita Claire brought up the challenge of this paragraph or this section as kind of, well, why did the text have to open it up to so many various interpretations?
Mhm.
I want to turn that around, Rita Claire, and I say, if I was in a room, hypothetically in a room with pastors and priests from all the different Christian traditions and denominations, and if they were arguing with who has the right theology, whatever, I would say, let's all read this chapter together. Let's read this section together. Look at all of you can find basis, probably, of course, I'm oversimplifying. You can find a basis for your theology here, and it's all here in the text. In other words, instead of seeing this as a negative, from my point of view, of course, as something that opened the door. By the way, I think the door is already open. We didn't need the text to open that door. That's human nature, as we've made. That this is a proof text for what we're doing, interpreting it differently, is right. That was the intention from the very, at least the way that we have the text. It lent itself to multiple interpretations on different levels. I always talk about the challenge for me with dialogue, with Christian, Jewish, Muslim dialogue, is that I feel that Jews and Christians are conditioned to speak in a pluralistic way, to think in a pluralistic way, because we have two versions of the creation story, three versions of the matriarch and patriarch, going down and she's my sister story, the two times the 10 Commandments, et cetera, and there are at least four gospels that in the text we have this condition of multiplicity of views and documentation, whereas in Islam, the Quran is Muhammad, the word given to Muhammad, and it doesn't lend itself, not easily, to that kind of message in the form of plurality. But I'm not making a judgment here. I'm just saying that's the challenge that I find sometimes.
But don't they have like the
I-
Shia, the Sunnis? Isn't there that difference?
No, that is, but if I could add something, Rabbi, in Islam, you're not allowed to do an interpretation. You can translate word for word, but there is a whole cadre of literature called tafsir, Tafsir, which is interpretation of the Quran according to what that particular person says. And there is about 1,000 different tafsirs available to you. And each one of them disagrees with the other one. That's why there are so many. So
Right,
this-
but the difference is that tafsir is post-Quranic, and
Yes.
and midrash, rabbinic literature, and church fathers is post-biblical. But
Mhm.
what I'm talking to from the academic world is actually taking the sacred text itself and the ability to understand there are different voices there. Right? It's a little bit slightly different. I don't know. John and then Steve to wind up, please.
I just, can we all agree that whoever and whatever God is, had the inspiration given to God's writers to formulate these texts in both traditions, that they're human instruments, but they were divinely inspired. And I think that's so rich when you hold these books in your hand and read.
Thanks for bringing us back to the spiritual religious side of things. Steve Kinney, some parting words?
Well, I would just, I wanted to ask Ajit, from a Baha'i perspective, this conversation means what, Ajit? I mean, what do you observe from your understanding of plurality and the way that the Baha'i sees everybody together? Do you have any thought about that? I don't want to.
No. I would tell you that the Baha'i faith is too new at this point to have developed these controversies and differences of interpretation. Who knows what happens in the future? But for now, this is we since we Baha'is have no clergy, we are allowed to each of us read a passage and say, this is what I think it means. And you might say it means something different. And we say, okay, you're right. I'm right too. See you later. Let's have a cup of coffee. I mean, literally, that's where we are currently. But I'm not certain that this will continue forever. That in the future we may not develop multiple interpretations and multiple scholarly people giving their opinions. It's almost always the scholarly people that argue with each other. Me, ignorant guy like me, I have read the Bible, I have read the Tanakh, and I'm trying to get a better feel for what I see in it, and say, let me hear from you guys who are the scholars and see if I can understand it any better.
Well, I just love this conversation because for me, as soon as we finalize one interpretation over another, we've created an idol.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as we stay unfinalized, then we can continue to have dialogue and not meaninglessly. It's not just a nihilistic, nobody knows, but I think something always new emerges between us through that process. But it just takes humility, and that's the rub. That's we're not good.
That's why I'm such a strong supporter of the reform movement in the Jewish faith, because they're not reformed ED, they're reformed. That means they're constantly evolving and constantly changing to take in what is newer and better. Although I would be ultra orthodox if I was Jewish, but nevertheless, I like what reform does.
Well, thank you all for this wonderful discussion. Next week, we'll begin with the sources on the back side of this to take another look at Psalm 23, which I think should be mentioned in this context, because this is the transition of Jesus into being godlike. And then the other two sources from early Jewish sources. And then we'll finish this chapter, I hope, as well next week. So may it be a quiet and peaceful end of week, and may we see some progress with somehow discussions of getting the hostages home at the same time, stopping the mass killings on the other side as well. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Look forward to tomorrow night, Rabbi.
Likewise, thanks.